I was always second place. Second to my brother, second to someone else's needs, second to whatever emergency came up that day. Birthdays, graduations, even my college move-in day, there was always something more important, someone more pressing. I got used to it. Or at least I told myself I did. Until I changed the rules. Until I decided that being second wasn't something I was going to accept anymore. I was standing at the altar, moments away from one of the most important moments of my life. The organist was just warming up. My heart was pounding. Not from nerves, but from something deeper. Something hopeful. For once I thought this would be different. And then my phone buzzed. I shouldn't have even had it on me. But a last-minute panic about losing the rings had made me keep it in the hidden pocket of my dress, a secret edition I paid extra for, one of those little things you don't think will matter until it suddenly does. I pulled the phone out and saw the text. "Sorry, honey, can't make it. Noah brought Paige to dinner and we lost track of time. Send pics." My heart stopped. A text. On my wedding day. Not even a call. I stared at the screen. My fingers going numb. My hand shaking so badly the phone almost slipped from my grip. In that one message, everything I'd tried to ignore for years came crashing down on me. I could practically hear my mom's voice. Cheerful and dismissive, like missing my wedding was just a minor scheduling conflict. James leaned over, his voice soft and full of concern. "Everything okay?" I turned to him, forcing a smile onto my face. "Perfect," I lied. I tucked the phone back into the pocket. The best $100 I'd ever spent, and now I knew why. The organist began playing the wedding march. I took a deep breath and straightened my shoulders. 65 guests turned toward me, eyes shining with love and anticipation. 65, not 67. Because the 2 empty seats in the front row were impossible to miss. Reserved for my parents. Glaring in their absence. Cold. Hollow. Like a silent reminder of every time I'd been an afterthought. But as I walked down the aisle, I realized something. This wasn't their moment. It never had been. This was mine. This was our moment. James and mine. The people who showed up. The people who stayed. The people who chose to be there. Let me take a step back. I'm Ellie Chin Martinez, 32 years old, middle school art teacher. And more often than not, the afterthought in my own family. My brother Noah, he's the star. Harvard Business School graduate, founder of a Silicon Valley startup that recently hit unicorn status, and ridiculously good-looking. Like, stopped on the street by strangers good-looking. He's the one the world and my parents never forgets. Me? I spend my days trying to convince tweens to care about brushstrokes instead of TikTok trends. I live in a tiny 1-bedroom in Oakland that eats up most of my paycheck, and apparently, I'm so low on my parents' priority list that they couldn't even make it to my wedding. Why? Because Noah brought his girlfriend, not wife, not fiancé, just girlfriend of 3 months to dinner. And they lost track of time. And this wasn't some thrown-together backyard elopement. I planned this wedding a full year in advance. Sent out invitations with real calligraphy. Followed up, weekly. My mom even helped me pick out my dress. So when the text came, "Sorry, honey, can't make it." Noah brought Paige to dinner, and we lost track of time. Send pics. It hit like a gut punch. On my day. My wedding. Not even a phone call. Later at the reception, I found myself in the kitchen, fighting to breathe through the mix of sadness and rage. James, ever calm, ever kind, rubbed my back and whispered, "You're spiraling. Try to focus on the good stuff. The ceremony was beautiful. Everyone loved your vows." "Everyone except my parents," I said quietly, dabbing at my eyes with a napkin, trying not to ruin my makeup. "You're right. I'm being dramatic." But deep down, I knew I wasn't. This wasn't just about today. This was about every time I'd been bumped to the sidelines. When I got into the Rhode Island School of Design, my dream school, they skipped orientation because Noah had a high school debate tournament. When I held my first solo art show, they left halfway through. Why? Noah had called. He'd gotten a promotion. My life has been a constant loop of, sorry, Ellie, but Noah needs us. And I had dared to hope, naively, that my wedding would be the one day I wouldn't be in second place. But it wasn't. They'll make it up to you, James said as we headed to the airport for our honeymoon. They always do. And he wasn't wrong. My parents had a habit of smoothing things over with grand gestures, lavish gifts, overly sincere apologies, like they could buy back the moments they missed. Last Christmas, when they skipped our annual dumpling-making night because Noah surprised them with a trip to Aspen, they mailed me a Hermes scarf. It probably cost more than my monthly rent. But the truth? I didn't want luxury. I wanted them to show up. Just once, I wanted to be the reason they cleared their schedules. The one they made plans around. The one they remembered. I don't want to talk about it, I said quietly, reaching for the volume knob and turning up the radio. We're going to Hawaii. Let's just focus on that. The honeymoon was perfect. Not in the glossy, picture-perfect Instagram filter kind of way, but in the ways that really mattered. We woke up early to hike up rocky trails just to watch the sunrise paint the sky in golds and pinks. We took long walks barefoot on the beach, the kind where you don't need to talk because the quiet feels comfortable. We swam in warm, clear water and stayed up late, sitting on the balcony with glasses of wine, talking about everything and nothing. It was the first time in a long time that I felt like I could just breathe. One evening, as the sky turned lavender and the waves rolled in soft and steady, James brought up something we danced around for a while. So, he said, wrapping his arm around me, when you think about our future, do you see kids in it? I didn't answer right away. I watched the horizon where the sea and sky blurred together like a watercolor. It was a fair question, a natural one. But it also brought up 1,000 quiet fears I hadn't quite untangled. I don't know, I admitted. Honestly, I'm not sure I'd know how to be a good mom. He didn't press me. He never did. You would, he said gently. And we'd figure it out together. I hesitated. It's just, the way I grew up, I don't have the best example. I've always felt like I didn't matter as much, like I was optional. We wouldn't do that, James said firmly. We'd never play favorites. I know how that feels. And he did. James was the youngest of 4. He'd told me once how he used to pretend to fall asleep in the back seat just so he wouldn't have to hear his parents talk over him like he wasn't there. How he felt like his accomplishments were always measured against what his siblings had already done. How he'd learned to take care of himself, emotionally and otherwise, because no one else really did. We'd bonded over that the night we met. 2 people who understood what it meant to be invisible in your own family. I know, I said, resting my head against his shoulder. I just need time. He nodded. No pressure, no timeline, just quiet understanding. I reached for my phone without thinking. Habit, really. I opened Instagram, hoping maybe there'd be something. A like, a comment, a text, nothing. It had been 3 days since I'd posted our wedding photos. Me in my dress, James beaming, the cake, the flowers, the dance floor. My mom, who usually couldn't scroll past a single one of Noah's posts without leaving a heart emoji or a comment like, "So proud of my boy," hadn't even opened it. That familiar ache crept in again. Not the sharp, sudden kind. More like a low hum. The steady pulse of being forgotten. Dismissed. Left out. I put my phone down and looked out at the water. The breeze brushing strands of hair across my face. I took a deep breath. The air salty and warm, trying to let the disappointment pass through me like the tide. "Let's get dinner," I said finally, standing up and brushing the sand off my legs. I managed a smile, small but real. "I'm starving." When we got back from the honeymoon, a big package was waiting outside our door. Inside, a sleek top-of-the-line espresso machine, one I'd once mentioned in passing maybe 6 months ago. And a crisp white card tucked neatly on top. "Congratulations to the happy couple. Sorry we missed the big day. Emergency with Noah's company. We'll explain everything over dinner next week. Love, Mom and Dad." I stared at it for a second. Then I crumpled the card in my hand and tossed it across the room. "Ellie," James said gently. "They're lying," I snapped, my voice shaking. The emergency wasn't some crisis at Noah's company. It was dinner. Dinner with Noah and Paige. They texted me. They couldn't even bother to keep their story straight. James bent down, picked up the card, and tried to smooth it out. "Maybe we should hear them out." "Why?" I said, starting to pace. "So they can give me another well-rehearsed excuse? Another guilt-laced apology and a shiny gift to distract me from the fact that my brother is always going to come first?" I stopped and looked at him. My hands were trembling, but I felt clear. Sharper than I had in a long time. "I'm done, James. I've spent my entire life bending over backwards, trying to believe next time would be different. But it never is." He was quiet for a second, then asked, "So what are you going to do?" I took a breath. "I'm going to change the rules." Later that night, I opened my phone and typed out a reply to their dinner invite. "Too busy. Maybe next month. Simple. Dry. Final." My finger hovered over the send button for a full minute. Saying no, even just once, felt like crossing a line I'd tiptoed around for years. And then I tapped it. Not even 30 seconds later, my phone rang. My mom's name lit up the screen. I stared at it. Then I declined the call. It rang again. And again. I turned the phone off and set it on the table, the silence between us loud and heavy. James looked at me from across the couch. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. I shook my head. "No," I said honestly. "But I can't keep doing the same thing and expecting something to change." He nodded, and we sat there in the quiet, the hum of the city outside our window, the phone dark between us. And for the first time, I felt something shift. Not in them. In me. 2 days later, my mom showed up at my school during my lunch break. It didn't take long for the students to notice. "Miss Martinez, is that your mom?" One of them whispered, eyes wide. "She's wearing Louboutins. To school." I didn't even have to look. Of course she was. She marched straight into my classroom like she owned the place. "Eleanor," she said sharply. My full name, which she only ever used when she was annoyed or trying to make a point. I kept organizing my paintbrushes, deliberately not looking up. "I'm working, Mom." "We've been worried sick," she said. Her tone clipped but dramatic. "Your father thought something happened during your honeymoon." I finally looked at her. "Something did happen. I got married. You weren't there." That landed. Her face flushed with guilt, or maybe embarrassment. "We explained, Ellie. Noah had an emergency with his investors." "That's not what your text said," I cut in. "You told me you were having dinner with Noah and Paige and lost track of time." She blinked, caught off guard. "Well, Yes, we were having dinner to talk about the crisis. Stop, I said, quietly but clearly. Just stop lying. You missed my wedding because you thought Noah's dinner plans were more important. Just admit it. Her expression twisted. A mix of guilt and defensiveness. That's not fair. You know we love you just as much as we love Noah. I looked her in the eyes. Number, I don't know that. And honestly, I have 32 years of evidence that says otherwise. I set the brushes down. I have a class in 5 minutes. She stood there for a second, thrown. Then her voice softened. We want to make it right. We booked a table at Chez Panisse for Friday. We can celebrate. Just us. Do it properly. The old me would have said yes without hesitation. The old me would have felt lucky, even grateful to be noticed, to be squeezed into their schedule. But I wasn't her anymore. I'll think about it, I said. And then I turned back to my brushes. I didn't go to the dinner. Instead, I blocked my parents' numbers. I asked James to do the same. This feels a bit much, he said, hesitating as he adjusted his phone settings. It's just temporary, I told him. I need space. I can't figure out what kind of relationship I want with them when they're drowning me in guilt and gifts. The next few weeks were tough. I'd never gone more than a few days without talking to them, even when I was upset. They were my parents, and I still loved them. But enough was enough. They started showing up. Outside our apartment, at my school, and even at my favorite art supply store. One weekend, James had to ask them to leave our place twice. They're freaking out, he said. Your dad was crying. Part of me felt a strange sense of vindication. They were finally feeling what I'd carried for so long. But most of me just felt sad. Sad that things had gotten this bad. About a month later, I got an email from Noah. The subject line, please talk to Mom and Dad. I almost didn't open it. Noah and I had never been close. Growing up, he was always too busy winning awards and getting praise to pay attention to me. As adults, we exchanged the occasional birthday text and saw each other at family holidays. That was about it. But something made me click. The email said, I stared at the screen. And for once I didn't cry. I closed the laptop, leaned back on the couch, and let the silence fill the room, almost like it was offering me some peace. Maybe I was the strong one after all. I reread the last part of the email. Maybe they took it lightly. I know I did. Anyway, please call them, or I can come over and we can talk. Just let me know. Noah. I read the email 3 times, my emotions swirling with a mix of anger, confusion, and something that almost felt like understanding. They thought I was the strong one? I'd spent my whole life feeling like the fragile one. The one who couldn't measure up to Noah's brilliance, the one who always seemed to fall short of their expectations. It had never even occurred to me that my parents might see me differently. Maybe they saw me as self-sufficient, capable, someone who didn't need their constant attention. It didn't change the fact that they had hurt me, that they had missed the most important day of my life. But it did offer a perspective I hadn't thought about before. Maybe their neglect wasn't about me being weak or unworthy. Maybe it was because they thought I was fine on my own. I forwarded the email to James with a simple message. What do you think? He replied almost immediately. I think you should talk to them. But on your terms. That felt right. Finally, the idea of taking control, of speaking up when I was ready, not when they demanded it, felt like the kind of choice I needed to make. It was empowering. I didn't have to follow their script anymore. I could write my own. I agreed to meet my parents at a neutral spot. A coffee shop that was about halfway between my apartment and their house in Palo Alto. I got there early, my heart thumping in my chest, and chose a quiet corner table where I could gather my thoughts before they arrived. As I sat there, I felt both nervous and oddly calm, unsure of what was going to happen, but knowing it was time to face this head on. They walked in about 10 minutes late, looking more tired and worn out than I had remembered. My mom had dark circles under her eyes, and my dad's shoulders slumped like he was carrying a weight he hadn't shared with anyone. When they saw me sitting there, their expressions softened with visible relief, like they'd been holding their breath, waiting for this moment. "Ellie," my mom breathed, her face lighting up. She reached out toward me instinctively. I stood up but kept the table between us. It felt like the right distance. "Let's sit," I said, keeping my voice steady, though my heart was racing. They exchanged a glance, but neither of them argued. They sat down slowly, their faces a mix of guilt and concern. "We've been so worried about you," my dad started, his voice quiet and careful. I took a deep breath, still feeling the weight of everything between us. "I needed space," I said, keeping my tone calm but firm. "I still do. But I thought we should talk." My mom's eyes welled up with tears, and it felt like I was seeing the weight of everything that had happened, the emotions they hadn't been able to express until now. "We are so sorry about missing your wedding," she said, her voice trembling. "There's no excuse. We messed up terribly." It wasn't just about the wedding," I said, my voice steady but full of emotion. "It's been my whole life. I've always come second to Noah. Always." The words seemed to hit them hard. They both looked at me, stunned, like they couldn't quite believe what I was saying. "That's not true," my dad protested, his voice almost defensive. "It is," I replied, my voice firm. "Every milestone, every achievement, every important moment, if there was ever a conflict with something involving Noah, guess who always came last?" My mom reached for a tissue in her purse, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to hold back tears. "We never meant to make you feel that way," she said softly, her voice full of regret. "Intentions don't matter," I answered, cutting through the apology. "What matters is the impact. And the impact has been that I've spent my entire life feeling like I'm not enough. Like nothing I do will ever be as important as whatever Noah's doing." My father rubbed his forehead, letting out a deep, tired sigh. "Ellie, we've always been so proud of you. You've always been so independent, so capable. Noah, he's always needed more guidance, more support." I couldn't help it. I laughed, but it was bitter and disbelieving. "Noah? Mr. Perfect? Mr. Harvard Business School?" My mother's gaze softened as she met my eyes. "Noah's always struggled with anxiety. Since he was little. All of his achievements, all the success, that's how he copes. He pushes himself nonstop because he's terrified of failing. We've spent thousands on therapy over the years." I leaned back, completely stunned by her words. I had no idea. "We didn't want to burden you with it," my dad explained, his voice low. "You were always so self-assured, so comfortable in your own skin. We thought—" He trailed off, not sure how to finish. I swallowed hard and finished it for him. "You thought I didn't need you." They both looked down at the table, their faces filled with regret and guilt. "We were wrong," my mom said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "We took your strength for granted. We assumed you knew how proud we are of you, how much we admire the life you've built." I whispered, barely audible. "You never said that." "We should have," my father said softly, his voice full of remorse. "We should have said it every day." We talked for 3 hours. There was crying, arguing, and a lot of apologies. For the first time in my life, I told my parents exactly how I felt. Not the polite, filtered version, but the raw, unfiltered truth. And for once, they really listened. It didn't instantly fix the 32 years of feeling overlooked, but it was a start. As we were about to leave, my mom pulled a small, wrapped package from her bag. "This isn't a bribe," she said quickly, "or an attempt to replace us not being there. It's something we should have given you a long time ago." Inside was a leather-bound journal. I opened it and found pages filled with her handwriting. Entries that stretched all the way back to my childhood. "I've kept a journal about you since you were born," she explained. "All the little moments, the things you said, the milestones. I have one for Noah too, but this one is just for you." I flipped through the pages, reading about my life from her perspective. My first painting, the time I stood up to a bully, the pride she felt when I got my teaching degree. It was a record of a child who was seen, valued, and loved. "Why didn't you ever show me this?" I asked, my throat tightening with emotion. "I thought I showed you every day," she said quietly, her eyes filled with regret. I was wrong. In the months that followed, we began to establish new boundaries. I told my parents exactly what I needed from them. More one-on-one time with me, recognition for my own achievements, and respect for the choices I made. They didn't always get it right, but they made an effort. And that meant a lot. But the biggest surprise came from Noah. Apparently, after our parents and I had that heart-to-heart, they had a similar talk with him. One evening he called me, sounding unusually unsure of himself. "I never knew you felt overshadowed," he said quietly. I nearly dropped the phone. "What? How could you possibly think that?" "No, really," he said. "I always thought you were the favorite." I was stunned. "How could you think that?" I asked. "You were always the golden child." "You were always so free," he replied. "Mom and Dad let you pursue art. They gave you space to figure out your life. But with me, they micromanaged everything. I had to fight for any bit of independence. It was like hearing about my childhood through a funhouse mirror. Recognizable, but distorted in a way that was almost unrecognizable. I couldn't believe what he was saying. "I thought they didn't care about what I did," I told him. "I thought they always focused on you because you were the one they were proud of." Noah's laugh was hollow, tired. "They focused on me because they were scared I'd fall apart. You don't know how many panic attacks I had before debate tournaments or big tests. They hovered over me because they thought I couldn't handle anything." We talked for hours that night. It was the first real conversation we'd ever had. And for the first time in a long while, I felt heard. 6 months after our wedding, my parents surprised us with a reception, the celebration they had missed. They invited all the original guests, and even a few more, rented an amazing venue, and gave tearful speeches. "To my incredible daughter," my father said, raising his glass, "who had the courage to teach us how to be better parents. We are so sorry we missed your wedding day. We can never get that moment back. But we promise, from now on, we will show up for you. Not just physically, but emotionally too." As I looked around the room, at James, my friends, and my students who had surprised me with their artwork for the venue, I realized just how much had changed. And yes, even at my parents and Noah, I saw something different. In that moment, I understood something profound. Changing the rules didn't just change my family, it changed me. I was no longer the forgotten child, the one who always came second. I wasn't the afterthought anymore. I was Ellie Chin Martinez. I was worthy of love. I was worthy of attention. And most importantly, I was worthy of being someone's priority. Later that night, as James and I danced to our first song again, I leaned in and whispered, "Let's have a baby." He pulled back, his eyes wide. "Are you sure?" "What changed?" I smiled. "I'm not afraid anymore. I know what kind of parent I want to be, and what kind I don't want to be. And I know I'm strong enough to do it right." He kissed me gently. "You always have been." As we swayed together, I noticed my mother across the room, watching us with tears in her eyes, full of pride. She mouthed 3 words. "You were right." And I was. Sometimes you have to change the rules to change the game. Sometimes walking away is the only way to find your way back. Sometimes you have to demand the love you deserve instead of just accepting what's given. I spent 32 years being second place in my own family. It took one missed wedding for me to finally say, "No more." Now I'm nobody's afterthought. I'm the main character in my own story, and it's a story worth telling. The end.